Joining us now is journalist Seth Harp. He is the author of an explosive new book. Let's go ahead and put it up there on the screen. He's been teasing it to us now for quite some time. The Fort Bragg Cartel, Drug Trafficking and Murder in the Special Forces. Seth, you have been making the rounds now with this book with some extraordinary new reporting and revelations. But at a very high level, why don't you just describe what you found at Fort Bragg, the consequences of our 20 years of action abroad, and what it wrought with the U.S. Special Forces inside of their community?
Sure. The book is basically an investigation into some unsolved murders that took place on Fort Bragg among Special Forces soldiers who were involved in trafficking drugs. But in the course of investigating those murders and trying to determine who committed them, I came upon a much larger story of drug trafficking and impunity at Fort Bragg, culminating in a huge number of soldier deaths beginning in 2020 and continuing all the way through 2024. So the book really draws in a lot of those themes and, as you said, tries to show how that very high mortality rate and high rate of criminality in the Special Forces and the Airborne Corps is attributable fundamentally to the way that our soldiers and troops have been used over the past 20 years of forever war.
And Seth, the book reads like, I mean, the structure is, I think, really well done. It reads like a murder mystery, and then you also zoom out and talk about these broader implications. And one of the pieces you really dig into, which I'm shocked hasn't been fully explored to my knowledge previously, is the way that our war in Afghanistan helps fuel a drug crisis here at home. Can you lay out some of those connections for people? Because, you know, and I'm sure that this was part of the story that we've told here is that, you know, you had the increase in Purdue Pharma and these other pharmaceutical companies start pushing oxy, people get addicted, then they turn to the street. I'm sure that's one part of what was going on here, but take us into your reporting on how the Afghan drug trade, you know, fueled by our war there, ends up coming back home.
So the narrative in which heroin addiction in the United States is precipitated, by overly lax prescribing practices around opiate drugs. That's true. That's not a false narrative. However, what it leaves out is that during the 2000s and 2010s, there was a flood of supply of heroin in the United States, enormous availability, high potency. And my book tries to show how the majority of that heroin came from Afghanistan while it was under occupation by U.S. forces, which is an angle of the war that has not been thoroughly explored to date.
So one of the things, Seth, I wanted to get into were some of the really extraordinary stuff that you uncovered in your book. I mean, just pure, like, wanton behavior, you know, by some of the troops that you're alleging there. Can you go into that, including titanium teeth for dogs and eating human flesh? These have been the most controversial claims that you've made in the book.
So that detail is really passing detail in the book. However, it is something that people seized upon online. There was an operator who was suffering from extreme moral injury, PTSD, drug addiction, who was involved in the drug trafficking activities at Fort Bragg. His name was Billy Levine. He had been a dog handler on Delta Force. And in fact, he had adopted one of the unit's working animals after it had been retired. And I related a story that Billy told to the sister of another Green Beret, in which he said that the dog had had its titanium teeth removed upon retirement in order to prevent it from posing a danger to people, because while in service, the dog had actually developed a taste for human flesh. Again, this was something in the nature of hearsay that I repeated in the book. It was a credible enough claim, but people seized upon that online and were saying this detail has to be made up. However, no sooner did that pile-on begin than somebody anonymously posted a video of a clearly marked Delta Force canine, or a Special Forces canine in any event, doing almost exactly what I had described in the book. I don't want to horrify people by describing it in graphic detail, but it was amazing to see video evidence of exactly what I had alleged emerge just like that.
Seth, not to turn this into a gotcha or anything, the reason I'm asking is I did have some people in the community reach out to me about your book, and they knew that you and I were close, and they were alleging that you had not reached out to them for comment in some of these specific instances. This isn't to put down your work, but I do want to ask you, because some very specific claims have been made here about not being reached out for comment specifically on some of these allegations, using some of the hearsay and other things, and then claiming a firing, I believe, of a person claiming a voluntary leaving when they were fired in one particular case. I want to give you a chance to address that just to get it on the record.
Sure. That's just not true. We contacted everyone who's named in the book, or made an attempt to contact them. If they're named, we made an attempt to contact them. And all of the allegations that we make about the unit, we make about Delta Force, about the Special Forces, all of that has gone to the Special Forces Command with an opportunity for them to comment. They have declined every single time, including most recently when Politico did an excerpt. We sent them a very long email outlining every single thing that we were going to say in the article. And they said, because your comment involves because your question involves a special mission unit, we cannot comment. So I find it to be kind of a double game they're playing, where at the one point they hide behind, the unit secrecy and say that we can't comment on any of these allegations. And then when the book comes out, they say, well, you didn't really talk to any of us. It's also not true that I didn't interview Delta Force operators. There's several who are named in the book, and there's even more who spoke to me completely off the record on condition that I not even describe them. So the idea that no one was contacted, that there were allegations that were a surprise, people are just simply making that up. I don't know where they're getting that. We don't go into that. We don't say every single no comment is recited in the book, because that gets boring. But that allegation is completely baseless.
Wanted to make sure it was addressed.
Let's talk a little bit more about Delta Force, which is where you focus your reporting. I mean, first of all, for people who don't know, where did Delta Force come from? How was it established? And in what way have they been used and deployed during the War on Terror in particular?
So Delta Force started out as a very specialized and very elite counterterrorism unit in the early 1980s or in the late 1970s originally. For many years, it was not used very often because of its high degree of specialization and use in things, rare missions such as hostage rescue. It continued to have that niche role after 9/11, and it wasn't really until the surge in Iraq in 2007, 2008, as I relate in an early chapter of my book, in which the unit became something much more of a death squad that was used in night missions, going out night after night, and just hitting targets that were believed to have something to do with the insurgency in Iraq. And that was a model that was expanded to Afghanistan during President Obama's term in office. And we heard a lot about this when it was called by the euphemism night raids. Drone strikes and night raids really became the entire American war effort. And Delta Force was always at the leading edge of that. Other people in the Special Forces community have criticized, because I follow the message boards. The book has become very controversial among these folks. And one thing that they were saying was that, and a lot of times when they hit targets, they're just capturing targets, and they're quibbling with the idea that Delta just shows up and just massacres everyone on site. Now, it's true that Delta Force does do capture missions. That certainly happens. I'm not in a position to say what the exact proportion is. But also just last night, I saw some comments by a former Delta Force commander named Jeff Teagues, in which he was saying basically the exact same kind of things as I was saying about the unit. He says, when we show up, we will kill you, your family, your village, your pets, your goldfish, was an exact quote from this individual. And he added that when the black helicopters show up, everyone dies. That's coming from a Delta Force commander to a podcaster named Dalton Fury just a few days ago. So I stand by my portrayal of Delta Force in the book. It was based on rigorous research and investigations and interviews.
Seth, to me, if I zoom out, and I know this all sounds tedious, but as you know, when dealing with Special Forces people, they like to get into the weeds. Controversy is very big amongst them. They enjoy sniping each other on podcasts. Yeah. Don't ask me why, but this has been long part of their own community. When I zoom out and I think about your book, it's about the toll that the Forever War took on the people who fought them the most, the psychological toll, and the lack of leadership from the Pentagon and others to recognize of what 14, 15 deployments of gangsterism, of just, wantonly going in, running missions under the cover of darkness, of killing people, even capture. Even if you're doing so legally, you're not doing anything wrong, I'm saying. But what that is going to breed into you as an individual. And what you write in the book is to show all of these unsolved murders on a per capita basis, exploration of drug use, of the psychological toll that it takes on anyone to serve in this type of environment. And I'm just saying, within that context, is that how you viewed the inevitable rise of what you say is the Fort Bragg cartel?
Yes, absolutely. And I'm not trying to portray some of the enlisted operators who the book follows their careers and their lives and their deaths. I'm not trying to portray them as monsters. On the contrary, I try to portray them very much as humans and show how they started off from a place of good intentions, started off as normal guys, joined the military, progressively rose through the ranks, and became more and more inured to the nightly killing fests in Iraq and Afghanistan and the terrible consequences that had on their bodies, their minds, and their souls. Inevitably, this is what our foreign policy breeds in military bases like Fort Bragg and in the lives of these people who get chewed up and spit out by this system, which it's a policy to use just the special forces groups and the Navy SEALs and other elite formations to prosecute these wars that we maintain, because American voters don't want to see large divisions of troops deployed to foreign countries. They don't want to see conventional troops coming back in body bags. And so relying on the special forces to wage wars out of sight and out of mind of the public is really, I think, a deliberate policy choice, but you end up with having the same guys deployed again and again, 10 times, 12 times, 15 times to these war zones. And that just does terrible things to a person, as you say.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I can't imagine what it does too. If you've killed on behalf of the U.S. government and you lose faith in that mission, like the level of moral injury and the level of nihilism that would instill in you, is beyond fathoming. I'd love for you to take us through a specific example here, if we can zoom into the micro, just so people can get a sense of some of the, the murders that you detail. One consistent theme also is the lack of accountability, because these guys are so valuable to the U.S. government and probably know so many things that they don't want coming forward as well. So that's another significant piece of the story that you're telling here. But tell us about the beheading of Enrique Roman Martinez, which is one of the stories that you detail in the book.
Yes, one of the strangest episodes of this spate of murders at Fort Bragg was the death of Enrique Roman Martinez. Now, he was a little bit different from my other subjects. He was a very young soldier in the conventional army in the 82nd Airborne Division. He disappeared on a camping trip with several of his fellow soldiers from Fort Bragg, who told police the next day that they just woke up and he was gone. By the way, Enrique Roman Martinez, although by all accounts he was a nice kid, he was dealing drugs on Fort Bragg. In fact, he was deeply involved in that world. He was selling psychedelic drugs, in particular, out of his barracks room. And so that was an important detail, because that same night, the night they went on the camping trip, he also took a large dose of LSD and was suffering a bad trip. That was the last thing that his friends knew of him. They said they woke up the next morning, he was gone. However, a couple of days later, his decapitated head washed ashore on the beach where they had been camping, or nearby, on a nearby island, showing that he had been murdered. Several medical examiners determined that his head had been chopped off with a hatchet or axe or some other kind of heavy and sharp hand tool. It is one of the most mysterious and baffling cases in the annals of military crime, and I devote 2 chapters dedicated to getting to the bottom of this mysterious case, which almost ends up being like an episode of the X-Files more than some of the sort of like mafia style crime that the other murders were characterized by. So the case of Enrique Roman Martinez is in the mix in all of this, and I hope that my book will provide the definitive account of what's known of his murder to date.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting question. What was your goal in writing the book, Seth? There seems to be this theory amongst these former Fort Bragg guys that like he wanted to embarrass us or any of that. I mean, knowing you a little bit, I don't think that was really your goal at all. Outside of being journalistically interesting, were there any policy takeaways that you would have liked to have seen as a result of the book?
Yes, there certainly were policy takeaways that I came to, but originally, no, that wasn't my intention. I certainly didn't set out to write a book about policy. I really wanted to get to the bottom of the murders of Billy Levine and Timothy Dumas
Yeah.
that took place on Fort Bragg. That was fundamentally my goal that drove the whole project from the beginning to end. But in order to understand those two men and what they were up to, it was necessary to delve into their respective lengthy military histories and provide the context of the wars that they fought in. And in doing so, I'm not going to sugarcoat what these wars have been all about or what the unit is like. And so, regarding policy changes that I would like to see, there are many. I think our military is in deep, deep need of reform. Really, the most fundamental policy change wouldn't be directly to change anything about the military so much as to wind down all these foreign wars and not have the need to have these small units going out and doing assassination and abduction missions almost every night, which, by the way, they continue to do in Iraq and Syria with virtually no media coverage of it and very little oversight from the Trump administration. So foreign policy changes, I think, are more vital than specific technical changes to the structure of the military. But down there, you could also advocate for certain policy changes. I think the use of special forces should be de-emphasized. I don't think it's a successful strategic model. The idea that we're going to use elite troops, intelligence agencies, the Air Force and the surveillance apparatus, proxy forces, this whole model of warfighting that developed under the Obama administration, I think has been a total failure.
I agree.
And so, moving towards a more conventional military, winding down foreign wars, I think those are the two most critical things that would alleviate some of the criminality and mortality we've seen at bases like Fort Bragg and also Fort Hood and other bases too.
Really well said.
President Trump has increased the defense budget. Of course, most presidents do, and it's now over $1 trillion. How effective is our military? How capable are they?
I think people complacently assume that because we spend $1 trillion in our military every year, that we must have, the greatest fighting force on earth. And that's just not true anymore. The military spending is so incredibly outrageously wasteful that it's hard to see where all the money goes when you're actually looking at the military. I was at Trump's military parade not too long ago, covering that. And it did not look like a force that $1 trillion had been spent on by any means. A lot of the armored vehicles, all of the military's workhorse armored vehicles are so badly out of date, 40, 50 years old in some cases. The Black Hawk helicopter is performing really poorly. There have been an incredible number of helicopter crashes recently, another subject that's been underreported. But it culminated in the crash of that Army Black Hawk helicopter with a regional jetliner over the Potomac River earlier in January. That was symptomatic of all these crashes that are taking place. And the military is struggling with recruiting, although 2025 was a little better than past years, but it's shrinking. It's at the smallest size ever. I really call into question whether the Army is even capable of fulfilling, its core mission if a division needed to be deployed on sudden notice or something like that, because of the institutional decline that we've seen at bases like Fort Bragg. And I really think that, the national defense budget has got to be reined in because that spending is not going where it needs to go. I don't know where it's going, but, we saw earlier in this year, the U.S. Navy went head to head with the Houthis. I don't know what their military budget is, but that's a country that makes Haiti look relatively affluent. And the Houthis arguably prevailed in a direct confrontation with the U.S. Navy over the strait, controlling access to the Red Sea. I mean, that was just such a pathetic performance that the military turned in. That's another, symptom or another manifestation of the weakness and decline that we have seen in the military and are seeing despite this gargantuan spending.
Yeah. Well,
the signs are everywhere.
Not only do you not know where that money, apparently no one knows where that money goes, given the fact that the Pentagon is, can't pass a budget, can't pass an audit, and can't account for significant portions of their budget.
right? And more things are being written to, like the laws that provide aid to Ukraine. It's written into those laws that spending can't ever be audited, which is just crazy. You know, they're making sure that nothing like Saagar, which did a retrospective, the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, provided some clarity and some limited accountability for how the war in Afghanistan was waged. And there's actually provisions of law that make sure that we'll never learn that same kind of information about the war.
Yeah, you're so right. Like, Saagar was one of the most important journalistic resources in Washington. I actually think it was critical in eroding support for the war in Afghanistan because people just cover their claims, and we did it for years and years. Always the stories that we wrote on it would go viral because people saw how much of a waste it was. We don't have a single clue, even though it's a similar amount of money that we've sent over to Ukraine. Seth, I could talk to you all day, man. Thank you so much for joining us. Congratulations on the book. We hope everybody goes and buys. We're going to link down in the description.
Thank you, Seth.
Thank you guys for having me.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show. Help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.